Okay, so now that we've gone through a couple examples of using marginal analysis to optimize a particular decision, I wanted to just kind of discuss via some examples here how this actually applies to our analysis. So this idea of marginal benefit and marginal cost is going to be very important moving forward. So a very large part of economics is based on those two ideas, right? So I often joke with students that if you ever get stumped on an econ exam, your best bet is to write something about marginal benefit and marginal cost, and you probably have gotten somewhere in the vicinity of what it is that your professor is asking about. Okay, so it's a very important concept, and one we're going to use in the next section of the class, which is to talk about demand and supply. So to kind of give us a little bit of foreshadowing into what we're going to look at in that next section of the course, let's apply our example of rent to sort of how it plays out in the real world, right? So here's a map of Portland, and you can kind of see the city center here is highlighted by that point A. And so generally speaking, right, people would prefer to live closer to the center of the city. So most of the employment, most offices, most people have to work in the city of Portland closer to the center of the city. And there's more restaurants and nightlife and all that kind of stuff going on there. So living closer to the city center is more desirable. And so generally speaking, I'm going to be willing to pay more to get an apartment closer to the city center, right? It reduces my commuting time, among other things. Now, what I'm just kind of highlighting is that, you've got these highways that circle around the city. And so that even if I lived out here in Salmon Creek, for example, I might not be that much worse off. Perhaps I'd be better off in terms of commuting time than someone that lived in, say, Milwaukee here, right? If I live in Milwaukee, I've got to take this rambling city streets before I get to the highway, as opposed to living right off the highway. I might be able to get there quicker. So if we kind of look at what actual prices look like for rentals, it's got kind of an interesting shape. So as we expect, the miles from the city center here on the horizontal axis. So if I'm really close to the city center, within a mile, my rent cost is going to be relatively high. As I move further away from the center of the city, my rental costs are going down quite a bit. So our previous example showed why that has to be the case, right? If you're going to add to my cost by making me commute longer, my opportunity cost goes up. I have to get some benefit, and that benefit is reduced rent. So we see that playing out in the marketplace. Now, what's interesting, right, is you get this sort of flat spot here where, from roughly 9 to 15 miles from the city center, the rental cost doesn't change much. Why? Well, that's where you're on this ring of highways that goes around the city between 9 and 15 miles. So your commuting cost isn't actually changing that much, and therefore the rent isn't going to change that much for an otherwise equivalent apartment. Once you get out past that, again, you see rent going down as commuting costs are going up. So this is actual data from the city of Portland that is confirming our simple example that people actually are optimizing using the tools that we've specified here, right? So the further away I get, the longer my commute time, I have to be compensated in terms of reduced rent. And so we will, so on the next slide, why do prices have these features? We just explain why in our example. The further away I live, the higher the commuting cost. I need lower rent to make that enticing. So what we're going to do in the next chapters is really focus on supply and demand. Demand is going to have to do with the benefit. Supply is going to have to do with the cost part of this. And that's going to help us understand better how these prices are determined and how various events can affect those prices. But this was just a neat example where I think we see our tools in action.